Okay, will the NHL ever expand past 32 teams? Now, since Seattle joined the league, the NHL's gone a bit quiet on this front. They haven't ruled out any potential further expansion, but for the first time in a long time, the divisions and the conferences are perfectly balanced with 16 in the East and 16 in the West, and 8 teams per division for the first time in a very, very long time. We've got perfect balance within the NHL. They've also stated that relocation is also not on the agenda. So with the Arizona situation, they want that team to stay in Arizona. How much? It doesn't matter how much certain fan groups or NHL fans whinge and whine, the team's staying there. Whether that Tempe deal gets signed off or not, or whether they stay in the Phoenix area or go to Tucson, they're staying in Arizona. The NHL is committed to the Arizona sports, but especially the Phoenix and Tucson areas, big sports markets for TV viewership and disposable income. They're staying in Arizona. That is the NHL's goal. So while relocation hasn't been completely ruled out, it's highly unlikely for a while. However, there are some locations that have been brought up on social media that have put in bids in recent times, such as Quebec and Houston at the time of the Vegas bid, when Vegas obviously got chosen over those two locations. Atlanta keeps getting brought up. The NHL has been there twice before. Kansas City gets brought up occasionally. The NHL has been there before. Portland gets brought up to bring in that natural rivalry with Seattle and potentially Vancouver. That gets brought up if there was any potential expansion. Milwaukee's been thrown in the conversation a couple of times, and the Hamilton area around Toronto has been brought up. Even Saskatoon in Saskatchewan has almost had a team as well. So we'll look at these in some detail. So Houston is the first one I want to discuss. They did have a bid before the 2017 expansion to have a team. Obviously, the league went with Vegas. Houston would have been a central division team, which would have been perfect at the time, but now the divisions are all nicely balanced and so are the conferences. So if you were to expand with Houston, for example, you're going to have to expand in the East as well, which brings in that Atlanta debate. Should we go to 34 teams? Maybe 36 teams. You would have to have 2 in the East and 2 in the West, 1 per division. Simple as. 1 team per 4 divisions. So Houston has the arena, they have the population size. However, one thing that I think concerns some economists is the reliance on oil and gas in that part of Texas. That is a concern. If there was a downturn in the energy sector, it could have a big impact on people's finances, disposable income, and therefore fans able to afford to go to games. And we have seen ups and downs in the energy sector in the last few years with COVID and even before COVID. So that could potentially put off the NHL looking at their economics. Economics is going to be key in this video. But Houston has the population, has the arena, did have an ownership group that was interested at the time of the 2017 and the Seattle expansion as well. However, the energy market is key to Houston's economy, oil and gas, and with that fluctuating so wildly in recent times, I think the Houston idea has been put to bed for a brief period. But if we were to go past 32 teams, that's probably number 1 on your list of cities to go to. So if they do go to Houston, what about Atlanta? Now, Atlanta, the NHL has a bit of a checkered history in Atlanta. Firstly, with the Flames, which end up being relocated to Calgary, and then with the Thrashers, which was just a disaster from 1999 until 2011. Yeah. Now, it's the biggest market in the US that the NHL is not in right now, is the Atlanta sports market, which I think is a problem. The fact it hasn't worked twice before for different reasons, and especially the Thrashers, I think that's such recent memory that I think it's put the NHL off. There's been no interest from an ownership group, at least, to have a team in Atlanta. There's been no official bid to be a 33rd team. There hasn't been any ownership interest. There are fans in Atlanta. We know this. We know that there is interest in the league in Atlanta. There are people old enough who went to the Flames games in the 70s that went back in the 2000s to watch the Atlanta Thrashers. So we know that there's that generational hand down of hockey fans in the city of Atlanta. But will the NHL be brave enough to go back there a third time? They don't often give second chances, let alone third chances. So Atlanta is a weird one. It has the population to sustain a major league franchise in the NHL. Every other major league, professional league, um, in the US is in Atlanta. Christ, even the MLS and the Major League Rugby are in Atlanta, not the NHL. That is a crazy one for me. So it's a potential, but because the NHL's been there before and had bad experiences, could that put them off, having a team there? It would make sense if you were to expand to Houston, you go to Atlanta, or vice versa. It would make sense if you are to expand past 32 teams, they're the first two teams on your East and Western lists, Atlanta and Houston. Kansas City, that has been brought up before, although as the NHL was there before for a brief period in the 70s, they haven't really considered going back. It's a prime Midwestern location. It will fit nicely into the Central Division. So if you were to expand in the West, it's a location you could expand to. But there's been no real interest from people with money, potential owners, to have a team in Kansas. It's a decent sized sports market, but at the same time, there's been no. It's not one of your top two or top three you want to go to. It will be a secondary location following any potential further expansion. You would have a Houston or Atlanta expand first, and then you would go into Kansas as a second or third team in any potential further expansion past 32 teams. So it's not a top ranking expansion location. Quebec City is the one that gets brought up the most by people online. We want the Nordiques back. Economics, much like Houston, actually, with the energy sector, Quebec, with its smaller market size, smaller population size, and the Canadian dollar versus the US dollar, and the added expense of running a team north of the border. Economics. Economics did for the Nordiques the first time round, and it would do for any potential bid this time round. Now, they did have a bid in place for the 2017 expansion, which saw Vegas enter the league. Quebec City was one of those bidding locations for a team. And then the bid just sort of faded away. They had the arena. They had the ownership group at the time. They still have the arena in Quebec. It's the population size and the economics of running a team in Canada. It is not the last Canadian location that keeps coming up in conversation, however. So, yeah, well, we might want to see the Nordiques back. It's not going to happen for economic reasons unless something severely happens with the Canadian dollar versus the US dollar and there's almost parity because it costs more to run a team north of the border. You would have to have an owner who is infinitely wealthy, which doesn't seem likely happening at this point. Portland and Milwaukee are cities that come up as well for potential expansion. Portland, you could have an automatic rivalry with Seattle and Vancouver, and even the Californian sides as well. Again, the NHL hasn't been there before, but it is a major league city. But there's obviously the social issues within Portland right now, and it's an expensive location. Property prices are quite expensive, so people are feeling their budgets squeezed. So if you are a potential fan, you might have less disposable income to spend in watching games, which is also another thing. Cost of living. Can you attract players to these locations? Could you attract players to go there because taxes are possibly higher, economics, that kind of thing? Portland would be a good location, but I don't think it's on the top rung of locations that the NHL wants to go to. Considering that they've already just gone to Seattle, they've just balanced the conferences and divisions. Any potential expansion past 32 teams would have to be multiple teams entering at the same time. You'd have to have, let's say, 2 in the East and 2 in the West. You could say have Houston and Portland in the West and Atlanta and Quebec in the East, hypothetically. That's how any potential expansion would work for the scheduling. Milwaukee's the other one. Can you class that as an Eastern location? Is it Western location? It gets brought up, but there's been no real interest from an ownership group for a bid. But it could work. It will work as a hockey market. There's no doubt about that. For where it is located in the United States, it's in one of the more traditional hockey areas in the US. It would work as a hockey market, but is there the interest from an ownership group to take a team there? Then we get to the last two Canadian locations that I want to talk about. Hamilton, which is in the Toronto metropolitan area, a secondary city to Toronto. Yes, it would work, but Buffalo and Toronto would basically, at the league owners meeting, kill it. They would kill it because Buffalo draws a lot of its fans from the Ontario side of the border, with its catchment area being right on the border, and Toronto. It's a one-team city. Come on, the Maple Leafs. The idea has been branched before about having a team in Hamilton, and Toronto has blocked it every time. Whether Toronto ownership be willing to go, it could increase competition and therefore make us a better franchise is another thing. But while fans want it to happen, certain entities within the NHL will stop it from happening. And then you got Saskatoon in Saskatchewan. The St. Louis Blues nearly relocated there before. The league blocked that. Again, Canadian location in regional Canada. Costs more to have a team in Canada. Smaller market. In Canada, it would be similar size to Quebec, small market. And while it's hockey country and a lot of players come from Saskatchewan, and a lot of fans obviously live in Saskatchewan, could you fill out an arena? And bearing in mind, in the middle of a Saskatchewan winter, could you get to the arena? We've seen it happen in Calgary and Edmonton and Winnipeg, where fans are told to stay at home because it's like minus 30 degrees Celsius, minus 40 degrees Celsius. I think one year it was minus 56 degrees Celsius in Winnipeg. So winter conditions in Saskatchewan, while it's a hockey mad province in Canada, when you're told there's a stay-at-home order because you're going to freeze to death, and you have that weather disruption, that will affect scheduling as well. And the league has turned down Saskatchewan and Saskatoon before, and that was then. Obviously, the population is a little bit bigger now, but back then they were like, "This is not viable. I can't see it happening." Even though fans would like to see an 8th team in Canada, I can't see it happening. I think if we are going to have any expansion, it'll probably be Houston, Portland, Atlanta, that kind of thing. But if we were to expand past 32 teams, it would have to be multiple team expansion, maybe 36. Any other locations viewers can think of for potential expansion locations, please leave in the comment section below. I could have listed a lot of US and Canadian cities where there could be potential expansion, but there's not many places in Canada you can expand to. Quebec and Saskatoon and Hamilton would be the logical locations, and they've all got various issues preventing that. Hamilton will probably be the most likely to succeed on a playing standpoint and drawing fans in because of the population in the surrounding metropolitan area, but it'd be blocked by Toronto and Buffalo. Saskatoon and Quebec, its population size and the expense of running a team in a small market location would probably, again, the economics count against it. But there we go. Place your thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll have some more content for you very, very soon.